My name is Imogene Laurel. I am 67 years old, a retired literature teacher who once believed that a quiet home was a blessing. For most of my life, I trusted the rhythm of my house. I trusted its walls, its familiar creaks, its gentle silence. Until one afternoon when I stepped into my living room and realized something was wrong inside my own home. The air felt heavier. My belongings looked slightly moved. The silence did not feel safe anymore. That moment planted a cold certainty in my chest. I knew I had to protect myself, so I pretended I was traveling to visit my sister in Portland. I told Daniel and Sarah that I needed a few days away. I packed a small suitcase, folded 2 sweaters, placed my reading glasses in their case, then reached for the silver pocket watch my late husband left me. I held it the way some people hold prayer beads. It was the only object that never betrayed me. Daniel insisted he would drive me to the station. He hugged me with a stiffness that felt rehearsed. Sarah waved with a tight smile that did not touch her eyes. When the bus pulled away, I kept my face turned toward the window. But once we reached the next town, I stepped off through the back door, hailed a taxi, and went straight home. The taxi dropped me a block away. I walked through the cold evening air and knocked on the door of my neighbor, May Whitcomb. May was 72, sharp-minded, the kind of woman who never looked away from the truth. The moment she opened the door and saw my suitcase, her expression softened with a mix of understanding and worry. I whispered that I felt unsafe in my own home. Before I could explain further, she placed her hand on my shoulder and said one sentence that tightened every muscle in my body. "Wait until midnight, Imogene. You will see everything." May let me stay in her living room. We turned off most of the lights so the house would not draw attention. Through her front window, I had a clear view of my porch. I sat there, holding the pocket watch in my hand, running my thumb over its engraved initials, listening to the distant hum of cars against the night. It felt like the calm before a truth that could break me. As midnight approached, I felt the weight of the house across the street pressing against the darkness. May sat beside me. We barely spoke. The ticking of her wall clock grew louder. When the first bell struck 12, the porch light of my home turned on. My heart clenched so tightly that for a second I forgot to breathe. I stood up, slowly, as if any sudden movement could shatter the last bit of denial I had left. The door of my house opened. I held the pocket watch tighter. It felt cold, grounding, honest. But the figure stepping inside was not my son, and not my daughter-in-law. It was a stranger, a young man carrying a black suitcase. He walked in with the familiarity of someone who had done this more than once. Another person followed, then a couple, each carrying luggage, each welcomed, quietly into the house I had built over 40 years with my husband. I watched Sarah appear in the doorway. She accepted a thick envelope from one of them. She glanced left and right, checking if anyone was watching. She did not know I was standing across the street. She did not know I was watching her erase the sanctity of my home one step at a time. A coldness spread through my body. It was not anger. It was not sadness. It was the feeling of someone learning that trust had been slipping away long before they noticed. The porch light dimmed, the door closed, and the truth settled over me like frost. I had seen something, but it was not what I had prepared myself to face, and it was only the beginning of what I would learn in the nights ahead. If you believe stories like this deserve to be heard, feel free to like this video, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell. Your support helps these quiet voices find a place in the world. When the door of my house closed that night and the truth settled on my chest like a stone, I felt something inside me fracture. But before I could face the weight of betrayal, before I could understand how my home had become unrecognizable, my mind pulled me backward. It carried me into the years when that same house was the safest place I knew. Sometimes pain does that. It forces you to remember what was once whole, so you can feel the full depth of what is broken. I bought that house with my husband, Arthur Laurel, 40 years ago. I can still see the way he leaned against the moving truck with his sleeves rolled up, grinning at me like we had just stepped into a promise. The place was small then, barely furnished, walls plain and pale, roof needing work. But he told me it had good bones. He said homes were like people. What mattered most was the heart they held. For decades, we filled those walls with a life that was not luxurious, but honest. The kitchen was always the first place I pictured when I thought of us. Arthur and I spent countless mornings there. The room was modest. White cabinets Arthur painted by hand, a wooden table that wobbled slightly because he never got around to fixing its leg. The sunlight came through a narrow window above the sink, warming the chipped countertop as if trying to soften all the tired edges of our lives. I can still hear the soft rhythm of Arthur's knife against the cutting board. I can still see him stirring his coffee with that absent-minded look he had whenever he tried to solve a problem for someone else. He loved fixing things. He loved fixing people even more. The living room held its own memories. Arthur built the bookshelves himself. They leaned a little to the left but held everything we cared about. My old literature textbooks, his father's fishing journals, the silly paperbacks Daniel bought in high school. It was in that room where Daniel learned to walk. Arthur held his tiny hands while I sat on the floor with my arms open. Daniel giggled as though falling forward into my lap was the greatest adventure of his young life. I still remember the smell of baby powder and warm milk that filled the house in those early years. Our home felt soft then, safe, full of hope. Behind the house, there was the rose garden. Arthur planted the first bushes the week after we moved in. He said roses taught patience. You had to know when to cut, when to water, when to let them rest. Every spring, the garden bloomed in shades of crimson and pale pink. I used to hang freshly washed sheets outside just so they could carry the scent inside. Daniel would run through the yard chasing shadows of birds that passed overhead. I would watch him with the silver pocket watch shining in the sunlight, tucked in Arthur's shirt pocket, swinging with each step he took toward me. When Arthur passed away years later, he left that pocket watch to me. The metal has become worn and smooth from the number of times I have held it during moments when I needed courage. Introduced quietly into my grief, it became the last piece of him that time could not take. Daniel was a good boy in those days. Gentle, curious. At night, he would crawl onto the sofa beside me and place his head on my shoulder while I graded essays. His hands were always warm. When I think of who he used to be, I do not understand how he drifted so far from himself. He loved helping his father in the yard. He loved reading. He loved school. His fifth-grade teacher, Mr. Foster, used to stop me during parent conferences and smile in a way that made me proud down to my bones. He said Daniel had a heart that made other children calmer. He said Daniel listened deeply. He said Daniel saw the good in people before he saw the flaws. I held on to those words more times than I can count as the years went on. They became a reminder that my son once chose kindness without being asked. The shift did not happen all at once. It rarely does. After Arthur died, Daniel changed. Grief can reroute the heart. Still, I believed the boy Mr. Foster praised was buried somewhere inside. I believed time would soften his edges again. Instead, the edges hardened. And slowly, the house that had once held laughter began to echo in strange ways. The first signs were small enough that I convinced myself they were accidents. A door left unlocked. A faint thud behind the master bedroom when no one should have been inside. Whispers I heard late at night that stopped the moment I stepped into the hallway. I chalked it up to my age or exhaustion. But then Sarah began locking the master bedroom door even during the day. She would close it quickly whenever I walked past. Her smile tightened. Her voice clipped. The warmth I once believed she had for me cooled into something sharp. One night, I approached the door and heard hushed voices. Daniel's tone was tense. Sarah's urgent. When I asked if everything was fine, they acted startled. Daniel blocked the doorway with his body. Sarah said the room had a leak. She said moisture could damage my lungs. She said it was best if I stayed away. Yet she would not meet my eyes. And Daniel looked at the floor as if he were ashamed of something he refused to name. Looking back, the warning signs were already there. I just didn't want to see them. Pain is easier to accept when you believe you can still protect the person causing it. But the truth that waited for me the night I stood in May's living room was already whispering through the cracks of my house. And I had been too loyal, too hopeful, too afraid to admit that my home was changing in ways I could no longer ignore. I wish I could say the shift in my home was sudden, dramatic, or loud. It was not. It arrived quietly, inching across the walls the way cold settles into an old house. After Arthur died, the master bedroom became the room where I kept his shirts, his cologne, and the books he once read aloud on rainy nights. I went in often, sometimes to dust the shelves, sometimes just to sit on the edge of the bed and hold the silver watch he left me. That room was my sanctuary, until Sarah decided it no longer belonged to me. It started on a Monday afternoon. I came home from the grocery store and found Sarah standing in front of the master bedroom door with a key in her hand. She locked it with a sharp turn of her wrist. When she saw me watching, she startled slightly, then forced a smile. She said the room had developed mold. She said moisture had collected behind the walls. She said it was not healthy for me to breathe the air inside. Her explanations came in quick, polished sentences, yet she pressed her back against the door as if guarding it from me. I asked if Daniel knew. She said he did. But when Daniel came home that evening, he would not look directly at me. His eyes darted toward the locked door, then toward Sarah, then toward his phone. When I asked him if the room really had mold, he shrugged and said he trusted his wife. He spoke softly, too softly, as if the truth lived behind his teeth, but fear kept him from opening his mouth wide enough to release it. After that day, I rarely saw the key leave Sarah's pocket. She kept it on a small ring that clinked lightly whenever she moved. It was the kind of sound a person hears only when they are paying attention, and I was paying attention. Daniel grew restless. Every time I stepped into the kitchen while he was on his phone, he angled the screen away from me. His fingers moved quickly, then stilled whenever my shadow passed over him. Once I placed a cup of tea beside him, and he flinched so hard he nearly dropped the phone. He apologized, but his voice carried an edge I had never heard from him before. It sounded like guilt wrapped in panic. Our neighbor, Mr. Langley, stopped me one afternoon as I collected the mail. He said he had seen new faces walking up to my porch at odd hours. Young couples, a man with a backpack, a woman carrying a tote bag and looking around nervously. He thought they might have been friends of Daniel's, but his tone suggested doubt. I thanked him, tried to keep my expression neutral, and returned inside with a knot tightening in my stomach. Soon, the house no longer felt like mine. The kitchen that once smelled of Arthur's coffee now held whispers I could not decipher. The hallway seemed longer, the silence heavier. The walls, once warm with memory, felt like they were holding secrets I was not invited to hear. I walked through each room with careful steps, as if I were a visitor who needed to respect boundaries I did not understand. I learned quickly that questions only made things worse. Whenever I asked why the door was locked for so long, Sarah answered with irritation, carefully masked as concern. She repeated warnings about mold, about needing repairs, about how the room was unsafe for someone my age. But she never let me see the inseam. Her voice tightened each time, a thin thread pulled to its limit. Daniel stood beside her, silent, his shoulders drawn inward. He avoided my gaze as if my eyes carried the weight of truths he did not want to face. So I stopped asking. I learned to let silence do the listening for me. Silence, when used well, can reveal more than questions ever will. At meals, I watched how they exchanged glances. At night, I listened to the careful footsteps outside the master bedroom door. I noticed how Sarah moved with the confidence of someone who had taken ownership of something that was not hers. I noticed how Daniel seemed to shrink beside her. The house echoed with things they did not say, and in that echo, I found my suspicion. The shift became undeniable on a cold Thursday evening. I could not sleep. I went upstairs for a cup of water. As I passed the front window, I saw headlights sweep across the yard. A car pulled up quietly. Sarah stepped outside before the engine had even turned off. She looked around with caution. Then she opened the door for a woman I had never seen. The stranger dragged a medium-sized suitcase behind her. Sarah helped her lift it onto the porch. They spoke briefly. Then the woman handed Sarah a thick envelope. Sarah counted the bills with a practiced thumb, nodded, and guided the stranger inside my home. That was the night I could no longer deny what my heart already knew. One night, I saw Sarah open the door for a woman pulling a suitcase and accept cash in return. And nothing about my home felt like home after that. The night I saw Sarah accept cash from a stranger at my front door did more than confirm my suspicions. It stripped away the last layer of denial I had clung to. I knew I could no longer afford to observe quietly from within the house. I needed distance if I wanted clarity, and the only person I trusted with the truth was May. The next morning, while Daniel and Sarah were distracted in the kitchen, I slipped out through the side gate and crossed the street. May opened the door before I even knocked. She must have seen the tremor in my hands because she guided me to her sofa without a single question. The room smelled faintly of lavender tea. The calmness of her home made the chaos in my chest feel louder than ever. I told her everything I had witnessed. She did not interrupt. She listened with that steady, unflinching attention that only women who have survived their own storms possess. When I finished, she nodded slowly, as if confirming more than processing. Then she said something that made my stomach tighten. "Imogene, I have seen people enter your house at night for weeks. Not just one or two, groups, young couples, a man in a suit, a woman with a backpack. It was not my place to interfere, but I worried for you." Her voice dimmed into apology at the end, though none of it was her fault. I felt something inside me sink. She continued, leaning closer, lowering her voice. "And I saw Sarah once. She took money from a man and led him toward your master bedroom. She looked around before she did it, as if she knew no one should see." My hand went cold in hers. I had expected confirmation. I had not expected details that sharp, details that are intimate. The master bedroom was not just a room. It was the last remaining place in the house that still felt like Arthur. The thought of strangers crossing its threshold without reverence or permission made my chest constrict. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. I stared at my hands, remembering how I once folded Daniel's baby clothes on the bed in that room, how Arthur stood in the doorway with the sunlight outlining his shoulders. That door had once been the heart of the house. Now it has become the gateway to something corrupt. May finally broke the silence. "You cannot stay there without knowing what is truly happening. Whatever they are doing, it is not innocent." I nodded, though my throat felt too tight to speak at first. After a slow breath, I answered, "I need to see everything, not from inside the house, from a distance. They act differently when they think I am gone." The plan formed itself as I said the words. I would pretend to travel to Portland to visit my sister. It was believable. It created space, and it gave Daniel and Sarah the illusion of freedom that would reveal their real intentions. May squeezed my hand. "You will not watch this alone. You stay here when the time comes." Back in my house, I moved with quiet determination. Show, do not tell. That was the language of survival now. I pulled my suitcase from the closet. The zipper felt louder than usual. I folded sweaters with deliberate slowness, shirts that smelled faintly of laundry soap, a light coat, one pair of shoes. I placed them inside the suitcase with careful movements, as if every item was a punctuation mark in a sentence I had not yet dared to speak aloud. Then came the part that made my breath catch. I opened the drawer where I kept the silver pocket watch, Arthur's watch. The weight of it in my palm was familiar and grounding. I placed it into the side compartment of my suitcase, but after a moment's hesitation, I removed it and slipped it into the pocket of my cardigan instead. It felt wrong to hide it. I needed it close to my heartbeat. To make the plan believable, I picked up the phone and dialed my sister's number. I knew she would not answer during her hospital shift. I counted on it. When the call went to voicemail, I spoke loudly enough for the kitchen to hear. "I am packing now. Yes, I will take the bus to Portland. I need a few days away." I forced a brittle chuckle. My voice trembled despite my effort to steady it. I hoped the quiver would sound like age, not fear. Sarah's steps clicked lightly across the floor. She poked her head around the corner with a smile too sweet to be sincere. "You are going soon, right, Imogene? We will take care of everything here." The wording stung. "We will take care of everything." She said it like a promise. It sounded like a threat. Daniel insisted on driving me to the station. He barely let me touch my suitcase. He rushed to carry it, his fingers gripping the handle too tightly. His eagerness was not affection. It felt like urgency, as if my departure was a task he needed to complete to relieve a pressure he had been holding. At the bus station, he hugged me quickly and told me to text when I arrived. His phone buzzed immediately afterward. He checked it before I even stepped fully onto the bus. I chose a seat near the back. The engine rumbled. The bus pulled away. Daniel's figure grew smaller through the window. When we reached the neighboring town, the bus stopped briefly to let passengers off. That was my moment. They thought I was halfway to Portland by then. But they did not know the truth. I stepped off through the back door and quietly called a taxi to take me home. And the real watching began. When the taxi dropped me off a block from my house, the sky had already darkened into a deep blue. I walked quickly but quietly, taking the familiar path toward May's porch. Her front light glowed softly against the evening air. The moment she opened the door for me, I felt the adrenaline that had carried me this far settle into a heavy weight inside my chest. May guided me to the same spot by the living room window. The lamp beside us cast a warm, muted glow. Outside, the street looked peaceful, untouched, unaware. But the house across from us was a different world now. My home, my memories, my years with Arthur, and something else entirely. May poured tea into 2 small cups and set them on the table. The steam curled upward before fading. Behind it, I could see the silhouette of my house framed perfectly through her window. I stood there holding the silver watch in my hand, tracing the familiar engraving on the lid. It felt cold. It felt steady. It felt like the only truthful thing in my life. Night settled deeper. The ticking of May's wall clock grew. Louder. With each sound, my breathing became heavier, as if my chest had to work harder to make room for the truth I feared was coming. May noticed my trembling hands. She did not comment. She simply sat beside me, shoulder to shoulders, letting her presence speak where words would have been too sharp. A little after 9, the porch light of my house flickered on. My pulse jumped. May leaned forward slightly. Neither of us spoke. The front door opened. Sarah stepped into the frame wearing a cardigan I had once given her as a birthday gift. The sight of it on her made something twist inside me. She looked around briefly, then waved someone in. A young couple approached. They carried 2 duffel bags and a rolling suitcase. Their movements were practiced, as if they had done this before. Sarah offered a soft smile, one I had never seen her give me. The woman dug inside her purse and handed Sarah a stack of bills folded into a neat rectangle. Sarah counted them with the same confidence I had seen the night before. Then she motioned toward the hallway, guiding them deeper into the house. Moments later, the master bedroom light turned on. It glowed through the narrow side window. My chest tightened. That room had not seen a guest, friend, or visitor in years. It was the last sacred space of my marriage. Seeing it illuminated for strangers felt like a betrayal I could not yet name. Not long after, Daniel returned home. He parked his car casually, as if everything was normal. He walked inside carrying groceries. He did not react to the sound of unfamiliar voices. He did not seem surprised. He looked comfortable, almost relieved. Watching him move that way made the air inside my lungs feel too thin. I forced myself to stay composed. My fingers dug into the pocket watch. I pressed my thumb against the metal until it hurt. I whispered to myself, they might be friends. They might just need help. The words tasted false, but I said them anyway, because for so many years I believed that believing in my son was the same as protecting him. Doubt felt like betrayal, but now trust feels dangerous. May heard me and turned slowly toward me. Her eyes were soft, but the truth inside them was firm. Imogene, sometimes people are good only for as long as they need you to be the one who believes they are. Her words did not stab. They settled like quiet sorrow. A truth I had avoided naming, a truth I had sensed long before that night. Across the street, the door opened again. Another couple entered, then another. Their voices echoed faintly across the yard. Laughter drifted out for a moment before the door shut tightly behind them. Sarah moved with the rhythm of someone running a business, someone thriving in the shadows of someone else's home. The master bedroom light flickered brighter, then dimmer. People moved inside. Bags rolled across the wooden floor I had polished so many times, and as I stood there watching the house I had once built with love turn into something unrecognizable, the ache inside me finally found words. That night, 3 more couples walked into my home, and I knew the truth was unfolding faster than I was ready to face. The first night had knocked the breath out of me, but the second night carved something deeper. It revealed not only what was happening in my home, but how long it must have been happening. When May closed the curtains the following morning, she told me gently that I needed rest. I tried to sleep on her couch, but each time I closed my eyes, I saw the master bedroom light flicker behind my eyelids. I saw the strangers stepping inside my home. I saw Sarah counting money with quiet confidence. By the time evening returned, my nerves were stretched thin enough to hum. May brewed tea again. Neither of us spoke much. The silence between us felt like a shield. When the sky dimmed and the yard began its soft descent into darkness, I felt the silver pocket watch heavy in my palm. I traced the engraved initials, remembering how Arthur used to wind it every Sunday morning, humming under his breath. That memory anchored me, kept me from breaking into fragments I could not piece back together. Just after 9, the familiar pattern began again. The porch light of my house flickered on. May leaned back in her chair with a long, steady breath, as if preparing herself too. The front door opened. Sarah stood there wearing a different cardigan, her hair tied back neatly, her expression calm in the way only practiced deceit can be. A group approached the porch, not one couple. A group. 3 people this time, carrying suitcases and backpacks. They greeted Sarah with the ease of repeat customers. She accepted an envelope, a thicker one than the night before. Then she led them inside with natural authority, gesturing down the hallway as though giving a tour. The master bedroom light came on again. It glowed with steady brightness. That room had once been dim and soft with Arthur's voice. Now it looked harsh, exposed, and wrong. As I watched the shadows moving across the blinds, a fresh ache spread through me. I pressed the pocket watch to my chest, holding it against my heartbeat. More visitors arrived. A man with a duffel bag, a couple whispering to each other as they climbed the steps, a woman carrying a small dog tucked inside her coat. Laughter drifted out through the porch door. A suitcase rolled across the wooden floors I had polished with Arthur. The sound cut sharply through the night. This was no occasional favor, no temporary help, no misunderstanding. This was a business, a steady stream of strangers entering the place where Arthur and I had built our lives. A place where I had cried on the night he died. A place I had preserved with reverence that now seemed foolish. Tension thickened with each passing minute. Shadows moved behind the curtains. A man walked by the window with a bottle of wine in hand. A woman's voice rang out with a quick, enthusiastic laugh. The thump of luggage wheels echoed again. The house that once felt too quiet now felt too loud, too full, too strange. Then came a moment that struck harder than anything I had seen before. Sarah appeared in the hallway holding clean sheets. She walked into the master bedroom and shut the door behind her. A few minutes later, she came out carrying a bundle of used bedding in her arms. Pillowcases, sheets, the comforter Arthur and I had shared for years. The sight hit me with the force of a blow. My throat tightened. I pressed my fingertips against my lips to keep from gasping. She was washing my marriage out of that room to make it ready for strangers. I felt the weight of that truth sink deeper than anger. It was grief, grief sharpened by violation. That was the room where Arthur took his last breath, the room where I held his hand through the long hours of night, the room where I whispered to him that he could rest, and he did. Seeing someone strip those sheets without reverence, without memory, without care, felt like watching a sacred place be dismantled piece by piece. May rested her hand lightly on my back. She did not say anything. She did not need to. The pain was too raw to meet with words. I watched Sarah move through the hallway again. She carried fresh linens under her arm. She smoothed them with quick, efficient hands before leading someone else inside. A woman with bright luggage followed her, chatting about travel points and weekend deals. I closed my eyes, breathing slowly through the ache. When I opened them again, Sarah stood on the porch with another person, a man in a jacket. He handed her an envelope. She took it. But this time, she hesitated. Her eyes darted left, then right, then behind her, as if she was afraid someone might be watching. And in that shift, I understood something chilling. She knew what she was doing was wrong. On the second night, I saw Sarah accept another envelope, and she looked around as if scared someone might see her. The truth was no longer whispering. It was speaking plainly, and I could not unhear it. By the second night, I thought I had already seen the worst. I believed the sight of strangers sleeping in the room where Arthur had taken his last breath was the deepest bruise this situation could leave on me. I was wrong. The night that followed carried a truth that moved in shadows, not footsteps, a truth that came quietly, precisely, after midnight. May brewed another pot of tea, though neither of us drank much. I sat near the window again, the silver pocket watch growing warm in my hand from how tightly I held it. Its weight steadied my breathing. The house across the street was lit unevenly, with bright patches in the hallway and dim corners that seemed to pulse with activity. Strangers were still moving inside, rolling luggage across my floors, talking in low voices that drifted into the night like threads of a world I no longer recognized. May watched me with the soft concern of someone who knew I was perched on the edge of something darker. She did not speak. She did not offer comfort she knew would fall short. Instead, she let the room settle into silence. The wall clock ticked louder as midnight approached. The sound was steady, predictable, almost ceremonial. I drew in a long breath, feeling the air chill my lungs. Outside, the wind picked up lightly, brushing through the trees with delicate fingers. The kind of movement one might mistake for calm, if not for the tension that lived beneath it. When the clock struck 12, everything sharpened. The porch light of my house did not turn on this time. Instead, the side door near the driveway opened with a soft creak. Sarah stepped outside. She moved quietly, too quietly. Her cardigan was replaced by a dark jacket. Her hair was pulled back tight. Her posture was different, less casual, more alert. She scanned the yard before taking a step onto the path that led toward the backyard. A figure emerged from the shadows near the fence line. A man, carrying a slim leather briefcase. He approached her without hesitation. They did not hug. They did not shake hands. They simply acknowledged each other with the silent familiarity of people who had met before. The briefcase glinted faintly under the sliver of porch light. My stomach tightened. They spoke in low tones I could not hear from May's window, but their urgency was unmistakable. I leaned closer. May placed a steadying hand on my arm, grounding me without pulling me back. Sarah led him across the yard, not toward the house, but toward the garden shed behind it, a small building Arthur built decades ago. He used it for tools, tomato stakes and seed trays, a place that smelled of soil and cedar, a place of work and growth. Now it was lit by a single dim bulb that flickered weakly, casting long, wavering shadows across the yard. The man glanced around nervously before stepping inside. Sarah followed, leaving the door slightly ajar. A wedge of yellow light spilled into the grass. My breath slowed, not in calm but in instinct. My heartbeat pressed against the metal curve of the pocket watch. Inside the shed, their silhouettes moved with purpose. The man placed his briefcase on the workbench. Sarah pulled something from a drawer, papers. She handed them to him. He opened a ledger, the kind used to track numbers, names, dates. He wrote something, then handed her the pen. Slowly, she signed. The pen moved confidently in her hand, as if this was not the first time she had done it, as if she had practiced this rhythm long before that night. The man then opened his briefcase, removing more documents. They reviewed them, pointed at sections, whispered, checked something on a small device. The shed's light flickered again, once, twice. Long enough for me to catch the tightness in Sarah's shoulders. Her head turned sharply toward the house, toward the street, toward the dark. I held my breath. The wind pushed a thin whistle between the branches. A dry leaf scraped across the pavement. A dog barked somewhere down the block. Every small sound felt heightened, suspended. Then came the moment that changed everything. Sarah reached under the workbench and pulled out a small metal box, gray, heavy, locked with a clasp. She placed it between them. The man removed a key from his pocket. His fingers trembled slightly as he inserted it into the lock. May leaned closer. Her eyes narrowed. Even she had not expected this. The lid of the metal box lifted. The interior glinted faintly in the weak light. I could not see everything inside, only the edges, the shapes. But I saw enough to know this was not a simple exchange of money. It was something organized, structured, hidden, something that required records and signatures, something stored in a metal box under my roof. My breath caught. A coldness spread through me, sharper than the wind outside. The moment they opened that metal box, I understood that this was not only about renting rooms, it was something far more dangerous. And I was only beginning to understand the scope of it. The moment the metal box opened, something inside me shifted. It was not loud or dramatic. It was a quiet, sinking certainty, the kind that settles deeper than fear. I stayed at May's window long after the man left the shed and the backyard faded into darkness again. My palms were damp against the silver pocket watch. My breath felt uneven. The truth had stepped out of the shadows. Now I had to follow it. May waited until the lights inside my house turned dim. Then she turned to me with a calmness so steady it felt like a handrail on a collapsing staircase. She said one thing. "We should go." I nodded. No protest, no hesitation. Only a silent understanding that whatever was happening in that shed was no longer something I could witness from afar. I needed to see it. With my own hands, with my own eyes, with whatever courage remained inside me. We left May's house through the back door to avoid being seen from the street. The narrow alley behind our homes was quiet, cold. A thin layer of damp leaves softened our steps. The night air pressed against my skin. I felt the weight of the pocket watch inside my cardigan pocket, cool and grounding, as if Arthur himself was urging me forward. May kept a small flashlight tucked under her coat. She clicked it on only when we reached the old wooden gate that connected her yard to mine. The beam of light glowed faintly against the wood. She whispered that she had used this gate when she used to help Arthur with the garden. That's how she knew the latch still worked. My fingers trembled as I lifted the metal bar. The gate opened with a soft groan. I exhaled slowly. The yard was darker than I remembered. The rose bushes Arthur had planted cast long shadows across the grass. I felt a pang in my chest as the memories brushed against me. Memories of love, of work, of days filled with simple laughter. Now the yard held secrets I did not recognize. May stayed behind near the gate to keep watch. I stepped alone across the grass. The shed sat near the back fence, still lit by the dim bulb inside. Its door was closed now, but I could almost feel the echo of what had happened earlier that night. I reached the door. My hand hesitated. I took the pocket watch from my cardigan and squeezed it, letting its weight steady me. That small anchor felt like protection. When my fingers touched the latch, I realized I was shaking, but I opened the door. The smell hit me first. It was faint but unmistakable. A mixture of paper, dust, and something metallic. The shed was exactly as Arthur had left it, and yet completely changed. His old gardening tools hung on the wall, but the workbench had been cleared to make room for something else. Stacks of cash, bundles wrapped with rubber bands, lined in neat rows like they belonged in a vault, not a garden shed. I moved closer, running my fingers along the edges without touching them directly. Each bundle represented a violation, a trespass not only of property but of trust. Beside the money were printed reservation sheets, lists of names, dates, amounts, some crossed out, some highlights. A ledger lay open, filled with entries in Sarah's handwriting, columns of numbers tracked with precision, a pattern of transactions that stretched back weeks. My breath grew shallow, my chest tightened, but I kept moving. A folder lay beneath the ledger. I opened it. Inside was a stapled packet labeled Cognitive Capacity Evaluation. My name was printed across the top. My throat closed. I turned the pages with slow, careful hands. Areas assessed, observations noted, boxes checked. Some left blank, some marked with concerning phrases. I felt my knees weaken. Another document sat beneath it, a draft of a power of attorney. For Daniel, prepared but not dated, ready for signature. I pressed my hand to my mouth, my son. The boy who once placed his head against my shoulder in the evenings. The boy who grew distant but whom I still believed would never cross this line. Was he part of this? Or was he being led by someone whose ambition overshadowed her conscience? My heart raced. My mind churned. But I forced myself to keep reading, because denial, at that point, would have been another wound. Then I found it. A small, torn piece of paper tucked inside the folder. It looked like a reminder note, written hastily but unmistakably in Sarah's handwriting. Friday. Take her to the evaluation. Need her a bit foggy before she signs. I froze. Those words were simple, short, but they reached inside me with a severity that made my breath break. Foggy, before she signs, before I sign something I did not understand, something that would hand over my life, my home, my autonomy to someone who saw me not as family, but as an obstacle. My fingers trembled around the note. I could not feel the cool night air anymore, only the sharp pulse of betrayal, and beneath that, sorrow. Is my own son willing to harm me? The question rose inside me with a weight that nearly buckled my knees. Or has he become lost inside someone else's hunger? I stood there for a long moment, letting the truth settle, letting the ache move through me, letting the silver watch rest against my palm, its metal cold like grief. The shed felt smaller. The night felt heavier, and for the first time I felt the urgency press into my bones. I stepped back, slowly, carefully. I folded the note. I placed everything exactly where it had been so no one would notice the intrusion. I closed the door without a sound. Then I walked back toward May, each step steady, each breath deliberate, because the clarity that filled me had turned into resolve. I knew, without question, that I no longer had time. After the night in the shed, the world did not look different on the surface. The street still carried the same traffic hum. The sky still shifted from dark to pale gray in the early morning. Yet inside me, something fundamental had changed. I was no longer a woman trying to convince herself that she might be wrong. I was a woman who had seen enough, and that meant I had to act. May insisted I rest for a few hours on her couch. I lay there with my eyes open, staring at the ceiling, feeling each slow beat of my heart echo against the silver pocket watch in my hand. The note with Sarah's handwriting burned in my memory. Friday, take her to the evaluation. Make sure she is a bit foggy. The cruelty of the words shook me, but underneath the shock, a different feeling grew. It was not rage. It was resolved. By mid-morning, May brought me a cup of tea and sat at the edge of the couch. "You cannot face this alone," she said. "You need someone who knows what they are doing." I nodded. The idea had already taken shape in my mind, clear, steady, cold. There was only one person I trusted to navigate something like this. A former student who had become an attorney. Someone who had once told me that the law was another form of storytelling. Her name was Helen Marston. I called her office from May's kitchen. When she heard my voice, she recognized it immediately. There was warmth in her greeting, but when she realized I was not calling to catch up, her tone shifted into quiet focus. "Come in this afternoon," she said. "Bring everything you have. And Imogene, do not sign anything until we talk." That afternoon, May drove me to Helen's office downtown. The building was modest, not glass and steel, but brick, with a plaque beside the door. Inside, the waiting area was calm. Bookshelves lined the walls, law volumes, organized, underlined. I held my pocket watch in my palm until Helen stepped out to greet us. She hugged me gently, then led us into her office. Once the door closed, I placed everything from the shed on her desk, copies May helped me make. That morning, the reservation pages, the ledger photographs, the evaluation packet with my name on it, the draft power of attorney, and finally the handwritten note. Helen read in silence. Her brow tightened. Her fingers traced the printed sections with a steady, practiced touch. When she reached the note, she exhaled slowly. "They are not just renting out rooms," she said. "They are conducting an unlicensed lodging operation. No safety inspections, no permits, no tax reporting. And on top of that, they are preparing to remove your control over your own property. This is serious." The words "serious" and "remove your control" landed like stones in my stomach. "Is my son doing this?" I asked. "Or is it her? Is he aware of what this means?" Helen looked at me carefully. "Legally, intent matters, but so do actions. His name is on some of these documents. Whether he understands the full weight of what he is doing will be important, but for now, we must focus on protecting you." She outlined the steps clearly. First, we would secure proof that I was fully aware, capable, and in control of my decisions. She scheduled a formal cognitive assessment with a neutral professional, someone she trusted, not someone arranged by Sarah. She also drafted a sworn statement affirming that I had come to her independently, seeking counsel without coercion. Then she turned to my existing documents, my will, my prior power of attorney, bank authorizations. I had not updated these since Arthur died. Back then, Daniel had seemed like the obvious choice for everything. I had believed love alone was protection. Helen spoke gently, but she did not shield me from the truth. Right now, if someone pressured you at the right moment, they could easily override your wishes. We need to close those gaps, starting today. We spent hours updating my will. I did not disown my son, but I removed his automatic authority. Assets were structured so they could not be sold without independent oversight. We revoked any blanket power of attorney and replaced it with a limited structure requiring my direct consent. My bank accounts were reinforced with new passwords and additional verification. Important documents were moved, scanned, and stored safely in Helen's office. The more we worked, the calmer I felt. Each signature was not a weapon, it was a shield, a quiet form of armor. When we finished, Helen leaned back in her chair and looked at me with the kind of respect I used to give my strongest students. "You have done the hard part, Imogene," she said. "You saw what was happening and you came here before they moved first." I nodded, though fatigue pressed on my shoulders. My voice was low when I answered, "I do not want revenge. I want safety. I want the truth to be clear. I want them to face what they have done without me becoming someone I do not recognize." Helen smiled slightly. "That is why this will work. We will not scream. We will not act out of impulse. We will let the facts speak. Your silence with them while we prepare will be important. The more normally you behave, the more freely they will continue their operation." She paused, then added a sentence that lodged itself deep in my mind. "Your silence, Imogene, will become your strongest evidence." The idea felt both painful and powerful. I had spent years being quiet because I was afraid of conflict. Now I would be quiet with intention. Not a surrender, but a strategy. Helen made one last call while I sat there, a calm conversation with the local housing and safety inspection office. She did not embellish. She simply stated concerns, unlicensed lodging, possible overcrowding, potential safety violations. They took notes, asked follow-up questions. Then the person on the other end of the line gave a date, Thursday night. When Helen hung up, she looked me in the eyes. "On Thursday night," she said, "inspectors will visit the property. They will arrive when the house is full and the situation is clear, and when they do, everything will turn to a different page." I held the silver pocket watch in my hand, feeling its steady weight as if I could already hear that page turning. Thursday arrived with a strange stillness. Not quiet, but suspended, as if the air itself was waiting for something to shift. I returned to my house in the afternoon exactly as Helen instructed. Calm, unchanged, carrying nothing in my expression that hinted at knowledge or suspicion. Daniel and Sarah welcomed me with practiced smiles. Their voices were bright, too bright, almost brittle. Inside, the house was fuller than usual. Shoes lined the hallway, suitcases leaned against the wall. Laughter drifted from the kitchen where strangers sat comfortably, as though they belonged there. My home felt like a station people pass through, not a place built from 40 years of living. I walked slowly through the rooms, feeling the familiar hardwood beneath my feet, pretending not to notice the unfamiliar faces or the scent of cologne I did not recognize. By nightfall, every rented room was occupied, doors closed, voices murmured behind them. I stayed in the small guest room, holding Arthur's silver pocket watch between my palms. The rhythmic ticking grounded me, though my heartbeat rose each time footsteps passed in the hallway. At exactly 9:30, the house quieted for a brief moment. Not silence, but a breath. A pause. Then came the knock. Firm, measured, official. Daniel looked up from the couch, startled. Sarah froze halfway down the stairs, one hand gripping the railing. She exchanged a quick glance with Daniel, her face tightening around the edges. I stepped slightly forward, watching without revealing what I knew. The knock came again, louder this time. Daniel opened the door. 2 inspectors stood under the porch light, clipboards in hand, reflective jackets catching the glow. Their presence changed the air. Instantly. Authority does that. It fills a house before it even steps inside. "Good evening," one of them said. "We received a report about unlicensed lodging at this address. May we come in to verify the situation?" Sarah regained her voice first. "There must be some confusion," she said. "We are just hosting friends." Before she finished, the inspector glanced behind her. A guest rolled a suitcase down the hallway. Another stepped from the kitchen, holding a mug with the house's address printed on it. Someone upstairs called down, asking if fresh towels were available. The inspector turned to Daniel. "Sir, how many rooms are currently being rented on this property?" Daniel stammered. "None. This is our family home." The inspector raised an eyebrow. A woman stepped forward from the line of guests. "Actually," she said, "we booked online. The listing said check-in after 6 and breakfast included." Sarah's face was drained of color. Daniel swallowed hard. Their rehearsed calmness cracked like thin ice. More guests chimed in. A man nodded toward his phone. "Yes, we paid in full for 3 nights. Another said she had the digital confirmation email. They were not angry, only confused. They thought they were helping clarify the situation. The inspectors exchanged a brief look. "Everyone please remain where you are," one of them said. "We need to speak with the legal owner of this residence." This was the moment Helen had prepared me for, the moment where silence became evidence. I stepped forward from the guest room doorway. My voice was steady, low, clear. "I am the homeowner," I said. "My name is Imogene Laurel, and I have not given permission for any business activity to be conducted in this house." A hush fell over the room. Even the guests grew still, sensing the shift. Daniel stared at me as though seeing me for the first time in months. "Mom," he said, voice cracking, but I did not look at him. I kept my gaze on the inspectors. They nodded at me with respect. Then they began documenting everything: the number of guests, the money exchanged, the lack of permits, the unsafe overcrowding. They photographed the hallway, the makeshift storage in the laundry room, the lists taped inside the pantry door. Sarah tried to argue, tried to smile her way through it, tried to insist that this was temporary. The inspectors did not entertain any excuses. They instructed the guests to gather their belongings and leave immediately. To their credit, the guests apologized to me on the way out, though none of this was their fault. Within 30 minutes, the house was nearly empty. Doors stood open, suitcases rolled out. The laughter, the footsteps, the echoes of strangers faded one by one. The inspectors handed Daniel a copy of the citation. His hands shook as he took it. Sarah stood beside him, jaw tight, lips pale. When the inspectors finished their notes, they stepped outside, wished me a good evening, and closed the door gently behind them. The click of that door echoed like a final verdict. I turned slowly toward the living room. The house was quiet. For the first time in days, there were no strangers inside it, only the 3 of us, and the truth had nowhere left to hide. When the inspectors left, a quietness settled over the house that felt nothing like peace. It was the kind of silence that forms after a storm has torn through a place and revealed the foundation beneath. Raw, unprotected, honest in its destruction. Daniel stood near the entryway with the citation paper still trembling in his hands. Sarah hovered beside him, her jaw clenched, cheeks pale. The hum of the refrigerator was suddenly too loud. The soft ticking of Arthur's pocket watch in my hand felt even louder. I took a few steps into the living room. They turned toward me as though I had stepped into a spotlight neither of them wanted to face. Daniel spoke first. "Mom, I can explain," he said. His voice was thin and fraying at the edges. I did not answer. Not yet. Silence, as Helen had promised, held its own power. It forced the truth to rise without pressure. It left space for guilt to reveal itself. Daniel's breath hitched. Then, without warning, he broke. He covered his face with both hands as tears poured out of him. His shoulders shook with a grief that came from fear rather than repentance. When he finally managed to speak, his voice was strangled. I was drowning. I had debts from the business, credit cards, loans. Everything kept getting worse. I thought I could fix it before you ever found out. His confession cracked something inside me, but not in the way he expected. I felt pain, yes, but also something quieter and deeper, a tired sorrow. The kind that comes only after years of hoping someone will choose the right path on their own. Before I could respond, Sarah stepped forward sharply. "It was not just him," she said. "Everyone does short-term rentals. It is normal. The only reason this became a problem is because someone reported us. We were managing fine before that." She spoke quickly, hands gesturing in frustration. Not guilt, not heartbreak. Frustration. As if she saw this as an inconvenience rather than the collapse of a boundary she had crossed willingly. "You do not understand how expensive everything is," she said. "We were doing what we had to do, and you being home all the time made everything harder." Something in her tone revealed the truth she had never said aloud. My presence, in my own home, was an obstacle to her plans. I looked at her for a long moment before speaking. "This house was built by your father," I said quietly, "with his hands, with his weekends, with every hour he had outside of work. He carried Daniel on his shoulders through this hallway. He planted the roses in the yard. And while I was here tonight watching you lead strangers through every room, I realized something." Both of them looked at me, Daniel's eyes wide and wet, Sarah's narrow and impatient. "You have turned the place he built into the most unfamiliar house I have ever stood in." The truth hung in the air like a weight. Daniel flinched as if the words struck him physically. Sarah rolled her lips inward but said nothing. I continued, not loud, not with anger, but with a stillness so firm it made the room colder. "You thought I would never notice. You thought I would never question. You assumed I would stay small and quiet. You counted on my love to blind me." I took a slow breath, the kind one takes before stepping into deeper water. "There is something you do not know," I said. "Years ago, when your first business collapsed and you were too ashamed to tell anyone, I sold Arthur's antique watch set. I lied and said they were at the jeweler for cleaning. I sold them because you needed the money, because you were my son, and I believed you deserved a chance to stand again." Daniel's knees weakened. He reached for the back of the couch to steady himself. His voice broke again. "You did that for me," he whispered. "I never knew." "You were not supposed to know," I said. "I did it because I loved you, not because I wanted recognition." I let the silence settle again. It filled the room like a slow tide. Sarah spoke next, her voice sharp. "So what now? You want us to grovel? You want us to leave forever? That seems dramatic, Imogene." I turned toward her. The pocket watch felt warm in my hand, a reminder of who I had been, a reminder of who I no longer had to be. "I am not here to dramatize anything," I said. "I am here to reclaim what was mine long before either of you decided it was convenient to take it." My voice did not rise, yet both of them shrank from the steadiness inside it. "I am done being the shadow in my own home. I am done shrinking so you can feel tall. I am done sacrificing while you take." Daniel swallowed hard. "Mom, please. We can fix this." "No," I said. "You cannot fix something you refused to admit was broken." Sarah opened her mouth, but I raised a hand gently and she fell silent. "You both need to leave the house," I said. Not next month. Not next week. My voice held no tremor, no doubt, no apology. Tomorrow morning, you must be gone. I will not repeat myself. Daniel stared at me with the expression of a child realizing a door had closed forever. Sarah stiffened with indignation, but even she understood there was no room left to argue. The truth had filled the house completely, and there was no space left for them inside it. The next morning arrived with a sky the color of ash. I woke before the sun rose, standing in the kitchen with a cup of coffee warming my hands. The taste was dark and steady, the kind of bitterness that settles on the tongue without apology. I waited in the quiet, listening to the small sounds of a house no longer crowded with strangers, a house that felt wounded, but undeniably mine again. Daniel and Sarah moved softly upstairs. Their steps were careful, controlled, the kind of quiet that comes not from respect, but from shame. I heard a suitcase zipper close, a drawer shut, a soft exhale, no arguing, no dramatic pleas, only the muted sounds of two people preparing to leave a place they had already taken too much from. They came down the stairs together. Daniel carried 2 bags. Sarah held her coat over one arm. She avoided my eyes. Daniel looked at me briefly, then looked away. No words passed between us. There was nothing left to circle around, hide beneath, or defend. At the door, Daniel paused. He reached into his pocket and placed the house key on the table by the entryway. The key landed with a faint metallic tap. Then he set down a folded envelope beside it. He did not hand it to me. He did not speak. He only bowed his head, as if the weight of what he had done was finally settling over him. They left without closing the door loudly. Just a small click. A quiet parting from a home they thought they could control. I waited until their car pulled out of the driveway before picking up the envelope. My hands were steady, but my heartbeat was not. I opened it at the kitchen table, sunlight beginning to creep across the floor in thin lines. The letter inside was written in Daniel's handwriting, always slightly slanted, always slightly rushed. Mom, I am sorry for everything. I was drowning and I made terrible choices. I let someone else lead me instead of protecting the woman who always protected me. I do not expect forgiveness. I only hope one day you will believe that I did not mean to hurt you. I love you, even if you cannot see that right now. I read the words once, then again. My coffee cooled beside me. The ache inside me was not sharp. It was low and steady, like a bruise touched too many times. I felt sorrow, but not the kind that bends a person, the kind that clarifies. I folded the letter and placed it beside the silver pocket watch. Both belonged to the story of my life, though each carried a different truth. Later that morning, I met with Helen in her office. She reviewed the inspection report. She reviewed the updated will. She reviewed the revised legal documents. Her professionalism created a steady structure around my crumbling emotions. When she finished, she looked at me with a mixture of admiration and gravity. You have enough evidence to pursue charges, she said, not only for unlicensed lodging, but for attempted coercion. You have every legal right to hold them accountable. I stared at the documents spread across the table, the photographs, the receipts, the notes, the draft power of attorney, the evaluation request with my name printed boldly across the top. A question rose inside me. Should I press charges? I asked. Should I take them to court? Helen did not rush to answer. She folded her hands. Her gaze softened. Not forgiving someone does not mean you must destroy them, she said. Justice can be quiet. Protection can be calm. You do not owe them mercy, but you also do not owe them your rage. Ask yourself what outcome allows you to live without carrying their harm any further. Her words settled into me with the weight of simple truth. I closed my eyes for a moment. I let the question move through me. Did I want revenge, or did I want freedom? When I opened my eyes, the answer was clear. I will not pursue criminal charges, I said, but I will not leave myself open to betrayal again. Helen nodded as if she had expected that. In that case, she said, we formalize the inheritance changes. Daniel will no longer be the automatic beneficiary. Your assets will be protected under trust administration. He can rebuild himself, but not through your vulnerability. I signed the final documents with a steady hand. Later that afternoon, back home, I stood in the master bedroom doorway. The sheets had been washed. The air smelled clean again. The light fell softly across the floorboards Arthur once knelt on while repairing a loose plank. I took the silver pocket watch from my cardigan and held it near my heart. "Do you see this?" I whispered. "I finally learned how to stand." The watch felt warm, the room felt lighter, and for the first time in a long time, so did I. In the weeks that followed, my house and I began to change together. At first the rooms felt hollow, as if the absence of Daniel and Sarah had left a visible outline in the air. The cabinets stood half open. Small dents in the walls marked where suitcases had brushed by. The house carried the faint echo of footsteps that did not belong to it. I decided that if this place was ever going to feel like mine again, I would have to touch every inch of it with intention. Not as a caretaker of other people's comfort, but as the woman who had built a life here and was finally allowed to claim it. I hired a local painter to refresh the walls. We chose soft, warm colors instead of the stark neutrals Sarah preferred. The hallway became a pale cream, the living room a gentle shade of honey, the kitchen a quiet blue that reminded me of the morning sky. I opened windows while the paint dried, letting the scent of roses drift through. I scrubbed floors on my knees, not because I had to, but because I wanted to feel the wood under my hands again, to remember that every board had held me through joy and sorrow. With each pass of the cloth, the house seemed to exhale. The master bedroom was the last room I touched. For a long time, I could only stand in the doorway and let my eyes adjust to the memories. One afternoon, I stepped inside with a paintbrush and a small resolve. I moved the bed to another room. I replaced it with a large armchair by the window, a small table, and a tall lamp with a warm shade. Bookshelves went against the wall where our dresser used to stand. I stacked them with novels, poetry collections, and the journals Arthur once encouraged me to keep. Sunlight streamed in freely now, turning the bedroom into a reading room. The place where my husband had taken his last breath was no longer frozen in grief. It was a room for words, for quiet, for beginning again. On the table by the window, I placed the silver pocket watch. It no longer felt like a weight of sorrow. It felt like a witness. Every evening, May came over with a canvas tucked under her arm. She had always known how to sketch, but I had never taken the time to learn. Now, with the dining table cleared of clutter, we set up our paints side by side. At first, my hand shook when I held the brush. Lines came out uneven. Colors blended clumsily. May only smiled and said that art was not about perfection, it was about presence. We painted the rose garden, the old shed, the curve of the house against the sky. I painted my hand holding the pocket watch, the light catching its surface. Somewhere between the first stroke and the last, I felt something uncoil in my chest. I had spent so many years shrinking myself for others that the simple act of choosing a color felt like an assertion. Small but real. One afternoon, there was a knock at the door that carried a different sort of familiarity. When I opened it, I found Mr. Foster standing on the porch with a folder under his arm and a gentle smile on his face. His hair was thinner now, his back slightly more bent, but his eyes were as kind as they had been when he taught Daniel in 5th grade. I invited him in. We sat in the living room with tea and spoke about former students, about retirement, about the strange way time folds in on itself. Eventually, he asked about Daniel. I did not hide the truth. I told him enough to understand, but not so much that it poisoned the air between us. He listened quietly, his face etched with sadness rather than judgment. When I finished, he set his cup down and spoke carefully. "Imogene, I always knew you were the one who kept Daniel grounded in what was good. You gave him empathy. You gave him stability. You gave him a home that taught him right from wrong. That part of him is real, and it came from you. What he has done with it as a man is his choice, not your failure." His words entered a place in me I had kept locked, the small, cold room where mothers store their self-blame. Hearing him say that my goodness did not vanish just because my son lost his way allowed me to breathe a little deeper. Later that evening, after Mr. Foster left and May had gone home, I stepped into the yard alone. The roses were in bloom again. Their petals caught the late afternoon light, soft, stubborn, beautiful. I walked between the bushes, fingertips brushing leaves still damp from the hose. Above me, the sky stretched vast and clear. For the first time in a long time, I did not feel small beneath it. I felt held. Standing there, I remembered the night I first came to May's window. Suitcase in hand, heart pounding, not yet ready to believe what I would see. I remembered her hand on my shoulder, the way her voice settled over me. Wait until midnight, then you will see everything. Back then, those words felt like a warning. Now, they sounded like a strange kind of blessing. Midnight had shown me strangers in my home, a metal box, papers with my name written as if I did not own myself. But it had also revealed something else, something I had not expected. I whispered into the open air. I have seen what was hidden, not only the betrayal, but the strength that was mine all along. The wind lifted lightly, moving through the roses with a soft rustle, as if the garden were answering. As the sun began to sink, I went back inside. The walls glowed gold. Dust motes floated like small, aimless stars. I walked through each room slowly, touching the back of a chair, the edge of a shelf, the frame of a door. When I reached the front entrance, I stood in the threshold for a moment and looked back at the house, at the life that had been broken and rebuilt, not as it once was, but as it needed to be now. Then I closed the door gently. The last light of the day slid across the corner of the wall like a quiet promise. I am still hurting, but I am still myself.